Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, pull out the key bits of knowledge, and get you up to speed fast. Today, we're heading into a continent that George Kimball described so powerfully, saying the darkest thing about Africa has always been our ignorance of it. We're going to really get into why Africa is often called, the land of gold and diamonds, and how it lives up to that reputation, maybe challenging some ideas you might have. And this deep dive, it's really custom made for you, our listener, aiming to give you a fresh way of looking at things.
Absolutely. And the sources we've got, they really do paint this picture of incredible extremes and contrast, too. I mean, when we talk about Africa, we're talking about the second largest continent on the planet. It spans all four hemispheres, which is pretty unique. And it's home to, 54 countries? The scale is just immense.
Immense is definitely the word, yeah.
Yeah.
When you start digging into the sheer size and scale of Africa, it's kind of mind-blowing. Our sources lay out some just staggering geographical facts. Like, think about the Nile, the world's longest river, just winding its way across.
Right, 6,650 kilometers.
Or Victoria Falls, they call it roaring smoke locally, which kind of gives you a sense of its power, doesn't it? The biggest curtain of falling water. And then there's the Sahara Desert. I mean, it covers a quarter of the continent, 9 million square kilometers. That's hard to even picture.
It really is. A huge natural barrier.
And the Great Rift Valley, too, stretching, 8,000 kilometers of literal tear in the earth? It makes you realize Africa isn't just big, it's geologically epic.
And what's really fascinating, geographically speaking, is how Central Africa actually is on the world map. The sources point this out. Both the equator and the prime meridian pass right through it. You don't see that often.
Yeah, that's quite unique.
And you've also got both the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn crossing the continent. So that puts, the vast majority of Africa right in the tropical zone, which probably explains why the name Africa might come from the Latin Afra, meaning sunny. Makes sense, right?
Makes total sense.
And the sheer size. We're talking over 30 million square kilometers of land, about 8,000 kilometers north to south, and roughly 7,360 kilometers west to east. It's just vast.
And it's not just the landmass itself. Think about its borders. It's surrounded by oceans, isn't it? The Atlantic, the Indian.
And the Southern Ocean, yeah, washing its southern tip.
But what's really interesting for global connections is how close it gets to other continents. You get the Strait of Gibraltar up near Europe, just a tiny gap, really.
Very narrow.
And then near Asia, the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, also quite close.
Right.
And then, of course, the big one, the Isthmus of Suez. That little land bridge connecting Africa to Asia.
Which is exactly where the Suez Canal was built, a total game changer.
Absolutely. Connecting the Med and the Red Sea. Our sources mentioned it cut the journey between Europe and India by, 7,000 kilometers?
That's right. Instead of going all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, it just fundamentally changed shipping routes.
Yeah, it really shows Africa's crucial position, strategically speaking.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the huge scale, the geography, but let's get to that land of gold and diamonds idea. What's under the surface? The sources suggest Africa is basically a treasure trove, holding maybe half of the entire world's mineral deposits. That's incredible.
It is an astonishing figure. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, these aren't just, rocks in the ground. They're absolutely fundamental to global industries. Think about cobalt, for example. Crucial for batteries, right? And our phones. Electric cars.
Everywhere, yeah.
Well, the sources say over half the world's known reserves are in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, what used to be Zaire, or uranium for nuclear power. South Africa is a major producer, 6th largest according to these sources. And then you have the things Africa leads the world in: diamonds, platinum, manganese, plus huge amounts of gold, silver, iron ore, bauxite, chromium. The list goes on.
So it really lives up to that name.
It certainly does in terms of mineral wealth. These resources are deeply woven into the global economy.
And it's not just minerals, is it? What about other resources?
No, you're right. The sources also talk about significant petroleum deposits, oil and gas, especially around the southern edges of the Sahara. Countries like Nigeria, Libya, Angola, Cameroon, Gabon, Egypt, they're all mentioned.
Okay.
And speaking of Egypt, the sources also mention its reputation for really high-quality cotton, long, stable cotton. That's another valuable resource, just, agricultural this time.
Right, so immense wealth, both mineral and agricultural. But let's shift gears a bit. For a long time, Africa was known as the Dark Continent. Why was that? What made it seem so impenetrable to outsiders?
Well, the sources explain that Up until about the mid-19th century, very few Europeans had actually managed to explore the interior.
Why not? What were the barriers?
It was a combination of things, really. The sources list quite a few. You had a really tough climate in many areas, hot, humid. Then there were incredibly dense forests full of wild animals. And the coastline, it often lacked good natural harbors.
Okay, so getting in was hard from the start.
Exactly. And then inland, rivers often had massive waterfalls, making them impossible to navigate far upstream. Plus, the continent itself is largely this huge plateau, so you have these narrow coastal plains, and then the land just rises very steeply, difficult terrain.
Yeah, makes sense.
On top of the physical stuff, you had the Sahara Desert blocking the north, and a real justified fear of diseases like malaria and sleeping sickness.
Right, diseases were a huge factor.
Definitely. And finally, the sources mention that various local tribes weren't always welcoming to outsiders, sometimes actively discouraging them.
So it was this mix of geography, climate, disease, and human factors.
Precisely. It wasn't just dark because it was unknown on European maps, but because it was genuinely difficult and dangerous to access from that external perspective.
And the sources often credit certain European explorers, like Livingstone, Stanley, Mungo Park, with opening Africa up. That's a common narrative.
It is. That's the perspective presented in these materials, focusing on figures like David Livingstone, Henry Morton Stanley, Mungo Park, as being key to, quote, opening Africa to the outside world around the mid-1800s.
But it's important to remember that's an external view, right? Africa wasn't empty or waiting to be opened.
That's a really crucial point. Yes, these sources focus on that narrative of external exploration. But of course, Africa had complex societies, trade, cultures long before that. This perspective centers the European experience. The sources do also note, importantly, that while many African countries were under European rule for a time,
Colonialism, yeah.
right, all 54 countries recognized by the UN today are now independent, which marks a huge shift, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And within those 54 nations, there's incredible diversity. The sources mention Algeria being the largest by area.
Mm-hmm.
And Seychelles, those islands, being the smallest. Tiny population, relatively speaking.
Yeah, about 93,000 people. Compared to Nigeria, which the sources list as the most populous, with around 151 million, that's a huge range.
It really is. And they also mention landlocked countries. 16 of them.
Right, countries completely surrounded by land with no access to the sea, 16 of them in Africa. That presents its own set of challenges for trade and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, within the stories of these nations, the sources highlight one particularly significant chapter from South Africa, apartheid.
Yes, they do. It's described in the sources as an obnoxious practice. Essentially, a system where the local black population was systematically denied equal rights compared to the European settlers. Deeply unjust.
And Nelson Mandela's role is central here.
Absolutely central. The sources emphasize his constant efforts and struggles, including, remarkably, spending 27 years in prison for his activism.
27 years.
His work was pivotal in ending apartheid, which finally happened in 1990, according to these texts. And then in 1994, he became the country's first democratically elected black president.
An incredible story.
It really is. The sources note he's often called the father of the nation, much like Mahatma Gandhi in India. It shows his immense stature. And just to be clear for you listening, we're reporting this historical account as it's presented in our source material, not adding our own endorsements or viewpoints.
Understood. Okay, so we've covered geography, resources, history, nations.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one more huge aspect of Africa the sources highlight. It's wildlife.
Ah, yes, definitely. For a continent with such extreme landscapes and riches, it's probably no surprise it's home to some absolutely incredible animals.
The sources list some real record breakers, don't they?
They certainly do. You've got the African elephant, largest land animal on Earth, the giraffe, the world's tallest animal, the cheetah, the fastest on land.
Just iconic animals.
Totally iconic. Then there's the Nile crocodile, the largest reptile, even the world's largest frog, the Goliath frog.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
And of course, the gorilla, the world's largest primate, found in African jungles. It's an unparalleled biodiversity hotspot. So if we try and pull this all together, what have we learned from this deep dive into the sources?
We've seen Africa's truly immense scale, right? From its geography, the Nile, Sahara, Rift Valley, to its incredible natural wealth in minerals and resources that, fuel global industries.
Right.
We've touched on its complex history, that whole dark continent label stemming from a period of inaccessibility and its transformation into 54 independent nations today. And we've seen its vital role in biodiversity, home to some of the planet's most well, superlative creatures. It really is a continent that defies any simple label.
It really does. Yeah, going through all this, thinking about the sheer richness, resources, life, culture, it really makes you pause. How could a place so vibrant have been labeled dark simply because of external ignorance? So maybe a final thought for you, our listener. Given everything we've uncovered from these sources today, the geological wonders, the gold and diamonds, the nations, the wildlife, what hidden gold and diamonds do you think are still out there? Not just the physical wealth, but the stories, the perspectives, the understandings about this incredible continent that we perhaps still haven't fully seen or appreciated. Something to think about.